Welcome to my episode, Unstoppable by Minal and Bharwaney. I am CEO of the Reiki Healing Sanctuary, author of Reawaken, private tutor, and podcast host. My guest, Michelle Chapman, is trainer of neuro-linguistic programming. She had successful early career in marketing before being drawn to the world of mental, emotional, and spiritual growth, initially opening a training company as the first English-speaking NLP trainer in Hong Kong in 2007. She also is an instructor of hypnosis, timeline therapy, and a certified coach trainer. Michelle now trains and coaches in human potential for numerous corporate and private clients, and has just opened her private executive retreat in the UK, where she now lives with her family. Thank you for being on my podcast, Michelle.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. And I would like to ask the first question. Have your thoughts been so powerful that you talked yourself out of something?
My goodness, so many times. When I first sort of started to get into coaching and I transitioned into the world of coaching, I was, like many people, many new coaches, completely motivated and driven to do well. But then what I would do is hit a barrier. So I'd hit a barrier which looked to me like I'm either not doing this well enough, or I had a certain expectation about how I thought things should be. I'd trained with people who were top of their field in these kind of huge training programs. And without realizing it, I kind of thought that that was how I was supposed to do it. So one of my kind of biggest challenges when I first got into the world of coaching was to actually to find and to do things my way. I guess I stopped talking myself out of doing things when I stopped trying to do things according to some rules that I had made up about how I was supposed to do it. It's interesting in the world of coaching because very often we're told, be yourself, but do it this way. Be yourself, but like this. And so without realizing that those two things are really contradictory, I would talk myself out of something if I thought that I wasn't doing it according to that other person's rules or prescriptions, which possibly they hadn't even given me. I'd kind of made that up in my head. Life is a lot easier, I think, when you embrace who you are and when you drop the ideas about how it is you're supposed to do things, because there's less to talk yourself out of then. You're more in the moment, you're more present, you're more just kind of doing what comes naturally to you rather than a prescription, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And so often we're told what to do, how to do things, but in the healing field, that might not make sense to us. So thank you for sharing for that. And how are thoughts powerful?
It's an interesting thing that what I've started to do is to think less about thoughts as in the multiple kind of, because thought is so powerful. It creates the reality that we experience. We're all living between, it's almost like we live in a foot between two worlds. You know, we live in this physical world. We're here in this physical form, but we also live before form. We live in a world that is made of our own creation. And that is so confusing because the physical world exists. So because the physical world exists, we are constantly distracted into, oh, yes, but that's real. Oh, and yes, that's real. You know, whenever I use these examples, I talk about real physical things like, you know, a table. You know, I've got my desk in front of me, you know, and it's right here and it's physical and it has form. But I create my experience of that. You know, did I choose it? Did I choose it based on a certain set of criteria? Do I like it? Do I not like it? You know, we all, even physical things, we create our own experience of them. So thought in and of itself, and I'm kind of talking about thought with a capital T almost. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we have thoughts, you know, we have like 60,000 a day, most of which we're not even conscious of. But I'm talking about the whole process of thought. So if we look at thought as a mechanic rather than a collection of individual thoughts, it is the most powerful thing in the world. You know, wars would not be started without thought. You know, we wouldn't have beliefs. We wouldn't do anything without thought. So it's the thing that presents the real world to us. So in that sense, and it's kind of funny because I often say to people, you know, thought or your thoughts, either way you want to look at it, they're so powerful that if you don't believe that your mind is powerful, then it won't be. That is how powerful that it is. In that sense, thought is the most powerful thing in the world. The slight tricky thing with it, and this will sound like a contradiction, but it is so powerful, but it is only as powerful as the power that we give it. So part of freeing people from thought is the realization that it's thought. Now, in some ways, that doesn't make it any less powerful, but in some ways it does, because when we realize that just because something shows up in our head, it doesn't mean that we have to listen to it. It doesn't mean that it's relevant. It doesn't mean that it's even about us. You know, we learn so much, especially as small children, that it doesn't mean it's even come from us. So it's phenomenally powerful, but the more we see that, the more that we get to kind of take our power back and decide how much power we give to it.
I love that about taking power back and deciding that. That is an idea and concept, and also very powerful.
Absolutely.
Yes. And if you had influence over someone's thoughts, what would be the thing you would say to them?
There's an interesting thing. So having influence, if we think about, we're all here sharing a space, and we're all individual, we're all unique, but we're not living in silos, right? We're living together, we're living alongside one another. So in some ways, we can't really not influence each other. You know, we hear something, so for me, it's about what we choose to do with that influence. Very often, I mean, I'm a mother. It's almost like one of those things as mothers, you kind of think that you know best when it comes to your children. That to me is the ultimate place of influence. It's like, you know, I think I know best. I want to raise my children. I love them. I want the best for them. But one of the things that having kids has really done for me is to help me realize I don't always know best. And I have been challenged so many times when I have tried to influence someone else, particularly my son. He's really good at this. And so I'll say to him things like, you know, you really need to dress smart, or, you know, you really need to take all of those things out your pockets because it doesn't look good, you know. And he said to me a little while back, he said, so is that a you thing or a me thing? And I was like, because it's so true. It's like, you know, actually what I'm doing is trying to impose my will on him. And I don't even know if my will is right. I take influence very seriously because I don't always think that us trying to influence others is always a good thing. That said, what I really love for people to see is, firstly, that we live in this thought-created reality. Because rather than influencing what someone does or what strategy they take or how they go about doing something, if I can have them see that they're more than whatever it is that they think that they are, they will naturally come up with something better by themselves. So if I was going to influence someone, it's to realize that they think, that they live in this thought-created reality, and that they have a choice as to what they take from it. But also we're not bound by things that we've decided in the past. So I guess that would be my big thing, is just because we experience something, and you know, I work a lot with people in the corporate setting, I work with executives, but I also work with a lot of military personnel and serving families and serving personnel with the UK forces. Some of them have seen some pretty major things that they think, because it was a big deal, that therefore that will affect the rest of their lives. In that sense, what I would like to influence is, when I say you can drop whatever it is that's happened to you in the past, I'm not saying that it didn't matter, or that it wasn't a big deal, or minimizing it, or, you know, reducing it in any kind of way, but only that we have a choice as to what we take forward. We have a choice as to what it means about us now. Changing what it means about us now is possible. Changing the past, no, we can't do anything about that. But changing what our past means about us now, that we absolutely can do. So that's what I would like to influence, is just having people realize that we're not bound by past decisions, past experiences, and we are free to do and see things differently as we go forward in life.
So the conscious awareness, bringing it back to they have the choices to make the change from their thoughts and from their old habits to make that change.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have choices when it occurs to us that we have choice. If you speak to someone who is addicted to drugs, they will think they don't have a choice because they feel like they're being controlled. Whereas someone who's not will look at that person and say, but they are absolutely choosing to do what they do, but it doesn't look like that to them. We have choice when it occurs to us that we have choice. So it's about pointing in the direction of choice. So the more that we look to what we have choice around, what we choose to do, the more we look in that direction, the easier it is to see the choices that are available to us.
Sometimes they forget that there are choices, and sometimes they can be stuck. So that's why when we remind them there are choices, to try to have that maybe influence, or maybe just to remind them.
Yes. And what's interesting to me is that one of the things I notice is that when people have made bad choices in the past, and it wouldn't be something they've done intentionally, but when they've done things that they regret or they wish hadn't happened, or they now just see things differently, it's really important to come with that with some real kind of compassion for self. Because if people think that by making new decisions and creating a new life for themselves, it means that they have to beat themselves up for all the mistakes from the past, then no, they don't want to do that. So therefore they stay stuck. So a part of freeing ourselves from it is exactly by recognizing that actually the decisions that we made in the past, even if they're bad ones, were made based on how we saw things to be at that time. That to me is what the ultimate psychological freedom is.
That is great, because they're shifting from what was in the past to make the choices in the present.
Absolutely.
So that's great. And what has been your focus most of your life so far?
That's an interesting question, because it's funny, because you talk about choices, we were talking about choices just then. And sometimes I think when we're living life in the flow of the world, in the flow of kind of the energy of whatever is right now, sometimes it doesn't feel like we're making choices. We're just doing what comes naturally to us. So, for me, we moved back from Hong Kong in 2009, I'm going to say. I'm pretty sure it was 2009. And at that time I was pregnant with my son, and who is now 15. And really having my children has been a huge focus for me. Now, in some ways, I guess when I say held back my career, I've kind of been careful about how much time I spend working. My focus is, in terms of my career, has always been around doing whatever I can, whether that's in a small way or a big way, to leave the world in a better place than I came into it. If I can just do that. And part of that is around my family. So in some ways, my work and my family have just become sort of one whole part of just the life that I lead. When I get overly caught up in what I think I should be doing and success and doing really well, I don't do well. I really notice that. It's like when I get caught up on how I think things should be, I don't do well. My focus, particularly over the last sort of 15 years, has been to learn myself, to grow as an individual, to see the things that I am not seeing, so that I can be the best that I can be, both as a mother, as a wife, as a coach, and a human being. There's a really lovely feeling that you get to fall into when you just let yourself be however you are when you show up. So whether that's with my family, whether that's with a client, my focus has really been on just settling in as myself.
So when you settle in with yourself, you're more present, you're more aware, and you're not judging yourself with, oh, where should I be, instead of where I'm at, because you paused yourself and you talked yourself out of it, so to speak.
Yes.
And that is powerful indeed, because then you're not judging yourself. You're just in the way you are with your work or your family. You just are. So that's a great learning aspect. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And could pick someone and ask them a few questions or a question, who would you pick and what would the question or questions be?
So I decided I could kind of play it safe, but I'm not going to. So I would, do you know what I would do? I would invite all of the religious leaders of the past around one table. And I would have some kind of executive leadership session with all of the past religious leaders, because my view is that every religious leader was doing their best to point to something that is the same thing. And as human beings, we get caught up in what's right and what's wrong, and we get caught up in the detail. Now, as people, we do our best to describe what we've seen, and we use language, and language is ultimately insufficient. And yet it's all we've got. So we kind of have to go with it. And I believe that it is in the communication, it is in the language where the current barriers of today are. So if I could invite all of the religious leaders and bring them together and say, when you say this, what do you mean? When you say this, what do you mean? And I'm fairly certain we would end up in a pretty consistent place. I'm pretty sure that they're all talking about the same things. And I think that one conversation would change the world.
So hopefully there'll be consistency, there'll be understanding, there will be improved communication. That sounds like
and tolerance. And maybe even more than tolerance. Tolerance to me sounds like a begrudging acceptance. I guess I'm talking about a mutual understanding, a different way of explaining and describing the same thing. That's where I think we'd end up.
So hopefully they will see another point of view and not maybe just one-sided perspective, hopefully.
That would be nice.
And is inner talk dangerous or advantageous? What are your thoughts and ideas on inner talk?
That's a really interesting. What made you ask that question?
How you said earlier that, you were sort of judging yourself and where you're at and where you should be, but you stopped yourself. And that's how at that time when you explained you couldn't focus on work, say, and maybe, it took you back, you got stuck in time. So I feel sometimes inner talk can be our biggest cheerleader for ourselves. However, sometimes inner talk gets us to have procrastination, to beat around the bush, to have excuses. So, for example, I thought I will work out earlier, but I didn't happen to work out. And then I moved it to another date. So that is my inner talk because I have so many meetings going on. So that was not advantageous for me because workout is healthy. So I thought of this question because I wanted to know your thoughts on whether it's both or whether it's more on one side.
Yeah, and it is a great question. And I'm going to answer it in two ways, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I think there's two different levels that we can kind of look at this at. So the first is that you're quite right. Like sometimes our inner voice is our best cheerleader and sometimes it's our worst critic. And that's partly to do with the training process. I often think about the self-talk, the voices that happen in our mind, as a bit like training a humongous, powerful dog. In the UK, we've got this big XL bully breed that has been banned and is very controversial. Some people think they should be, some they shouldn't be, but they're hugely powerful. And most of the time, they're absolute softies, but they're phenomenally powerful. So your mind is like that dog in that we don't actually have ultimate control over it. Like the dog is, if you think about the dog, it's so powerful with the biggest jaw that if it wanted to turn and attack you, there would be nothing that you could do, right? It's just too powerful for that. At the same time, we don't give it freedom to run riot. So it has to be trained. So that training process, though, anyone who's trained a dog knows that you're in charge, but you're not in control. Because that dog can do whatever it wants to do, right? You train it by bringing out the best qualities in it, by having this mutual respect and this mutual understanding and rewarding it when it gives you the behavior that you want. I have a dog. We picked her up as a puppy and then the whole country went into lockdown in COVID. I wouldn't have chosen a dog under those circumstances, but it was, one of those things that happened. And, she's very anxious, particularly around other dogs, even though we have other dogs, the dogs that aren't in our family. So what I've had to do with her is exactly that, is that when she gives me the behavior that I want, I reward her for that. I give her a treat. I praise her because she's given me what I want. I tend not to tell her off when she's done something that I didn't want, because actually that response just came from fear. So she's just afraid. So I'm not going to beat her up and tell her off for being afraid, but I will reward her. And the more that I do that, and thankfully she's quite food motivated, but the more I do that, the more I treat and reward her for the good behavior that I want, the more she does it. So the mind is the same way. We can train our mind to give us more of what we want. And it's so powerful, we don't get to control it. That's just kind of a bit beyond us. But the second way that I wanted to answer the question was, it's really important that we do that we train our mind to give us, the kind of things we want. A cheerleader, right? We want the cheerleader. We don't want the one that's beating us up all the time. But at the same time, if we recognize that those thoughts aren't us, whatever thought shows up in our mind, we don't have to take that seriously. And when we learn to start quietening down and being more intuitive and recognizing that those thoughts don't represent us, in some ways, it doesn't matter what shows up inside your head if you know that it's not you. I've had some dark thoughts in my mind before. And the difference is, do I believe that those thoughts mean something about me? Or is this just some old habit that's showing up inside my mind that I actually don't have to be affected by? I don't have to let that mean anything about me. So when we quieten down, when our mind is more quiet, that's when we're more kind of who we really are. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I also had some negative thoughts the other day. And then I said, that's not me. Those thoughts are not normally me. Yes, I've also had some dark thoughts in the past, but I let that go because my focus was getting on time to the meeting, which was with you, which was all yesterday. And I was sharing this with you. And I said, whose thoughts are these? It's not even mine. I couldn't even recognize the thoughts. That was really funny. And I was wondering, like, is someone around me? Am I catching their vibes? Because sometimes I can catch energy. And no one was really there, even though I was walking on a bridge trying to get to the transportation. So I was wondering, okay, so I let it go. I changed my thoughts. I said, I'm going to focus on one at a time. And then that way, the inner talk did not really affect it to become dangerous. So I kind of changed my thoughts around. But negative thoughts can help us to motivate us to, be better. For example, to show up on time. But as long as they don't linger too long, then I think that's okay.
Yeah. It is the extent to which we decide to jump on those thoughts, I think, isn't it? We were talking before about your book. And is that something that you have included in that?
Yes, my notes to self is be your biggest cheerleader, because so often we forget. So often we may rely on other people to be the cheerleader for us. And suddenly, for example, there might not be any cheerleader for a while. So the mind might be wondering, okay, now nobody's there for me. It might overthink. It might run into deeper negative thoughts. So it's better we are our own cheerleader first and then accept praises and rewards and awards for other people. So, for example, celebrate your smallest achievement. Celebrate any achievement that you have done. So that is also something in my book, Notes to Self, that I share with others to help themselves.
Yes, I think that's amazing. And I think one of the things that is so important is to be our own cheerleader and also to be willing to sit with ourselves when we're not in a good place. So I think, sometimes we think of being a cheerleader as being, we think positive thoughts inside our heads. But then sometimes we fall into a place where we're not feeling good, or we're having healthy thoughts, or we're not feeling in a good a good way. And for me, it's also about being willing to sit with ourselves in a bad feeling. Is like, there's no greater form of self-love than being willing to sit with ourselves.
And it's so important and it's so true when you said healthy thoughts. So, what happened to me was less than a month ago, I was waiting to teach at a certain place in Hong Kong with a certain person. And they lied to me about the time and the place. And then before that, they already confirmed the time and the place and confirmed the lesson. But they were lying and saying, oh, we're actually rechecking our schedule. However, they didn't tell me beforehand. So, because of that thought, I was very stressed, very upset, and my body showed. I could not stop having stomach ache and I had to go to the washroom because I got very stressed, angry, and tense. So it really shows up in the body when we have negative thoughts and negative situations that happen to us. And this is my lesson to learn, to let go of that situation, even though I was in limbo waiting to go to that place to teach. I learned that even though they lied to me, it affected my whole body, my whole system. I couldn't get out of it. It took me almost an hour to change my thought, change my feeling, change my thinking, and then calm down. And I was shocked and I thought I could do better. And so the body's reaction is amazing to what we're going through in our mind.
It really is. I often think now that when we get a bad feeling, like people often come to me and they'll say, I want to come and work with you because I'm getting anxious. And when I get anxious, I can't focus. I'll be in a meeting and I can't think straight. And that's just part of the way that it works. The system will do that if we're anxious, is that we don't have full access to the prefrontal cortex. And so it's an interesting thing. But one of the things I always say is that those feelings aren't actually a problem in and of themselves. They're just information. They're just letting us know. It's kind of like, if you drive along, a motorway or a freeway, you go too far over to one side. I don't remember if you have these in Hong Kong, but in the UK, on a motorway, you'll have like what we call the rumble strips. And so if you go slightly too far out of your lane, you get this rumble strip to kind of alert you to the fact that you're going outside of your lane. And that is, to me, what the system is doing. It's like the people come and they say, I want to get rid of this anxious feeling. And it's like, no, you don't, because that anxious feeling is telling you something. And it's just telling you what's going on in your mind. And it's just giving us that helpful alert to tell us that, that we are doing something that we actually don't need to do. So it's quite, and I think the body is the same, in the sense that the feeling that we get, the emotional state, but our physical body is an extension of one system. So, it's going to give us that feedback. The question is, are we listening to the feedback?
That is true. And do you have any advice for someone who may be an introvert and someone that you may come across, maybe a friend who's an introvert? Do you have any advice for them?
It's an interesting thing when we give ourselves kind of labels and we say, I am this or I am that. And I guess the first thing I would do is challenge that. Because sometimes people really just enjoy spending time by themselves. And sometimes people are getting anxious or stressed when they're in company. So when we are, if it's the latter and we're anxious and stressed around people, then often it's just this sense that we think that we are supposed to be doing something different. Or it's this sense that I need to be a particular way, or I need to be seen a particular way. And so, if I kind of try that on, if I was in a situation where I thought I was supposed to be a particular way, and so therefore when I showed up in company, it made me feel bad, it would make sense that I wouldn't want to do that, which would lead to me kind of wanting to be more introverted and spend time away from others. But actually, most people who enjoy their own company, if they are totally comfortable around others in the sense that they know that there's not somebody else that they're supposed to be, then there really isn't a problem. Like it's okay for us to love our own company. It's okay for us to love peace and quiet. It's okay for us to love to spend time by ourselves. I would just question what stories we're making up about being around others, about who it is we think we're supposed to be. And And I would get really curious about what we might be making up that might just not be true.
That is very true also, because some people make excuses, some people feel uncomfortable around other people, but it's literally up to us to make up our mind on whether we want to hang out with others or not. And then hopefully they can respect our feelings and our thoughts and maybe our reasons why. Because to be honest, we don't always have to give people reasons to why, right? And if they are supposed to be, then we are just who we are. Yes. And can you talk a bit about timeline therapy? I'm curious, what is it?
So, timeline therapy is a set of techniques, and they are essentially a meditation process for releasing and changing unwanted emotions. So, the way that I have used them a lot, and we use this a lot in the kind of with the military community, also use them in with private clients, is about changing the way that we hold our past. If we become, for example, if we've had a lot of fear in our past, or we've had a lot of anger in our past, it's a really effective technique for getting an insight. I think of it as being, I used to think of it as being releasing the emotion, which is what it does, but it generates an insight that allows us to see things differently and hold things differently in the present. So it's a really wonderful technique, and it's very gentle. It's not a process where we go digging into people's pasts. So in that sense, it's very, very gentle. Yeah. And it's a whole new way of kind of experiencing where we've come from, which kind of allows us to create a new way of being as we move forward.
Okay, sounds so interesting. I never heard of it before. So thank you for sharing. And can you tell us about your retreat in the UK?
Sure. Yeah. My husband and I bought a barn many years ago, and we have been renovating it, restoring it, and we've got to the point now. We used to run retreats here, actually, many years ago, and over time things have changed. I did a lot more work away from home, and so that kind of fizzled out a little bit. And we really are blessed to live in a really lovely part of England. And it's just an hour from London, but it's very much in the kind of rural. We sit between Essex, Cambridge, and Suffolk. So it's in that little kind of pocket, and it's really beautiful. And I was sitting here one day looking at it, and I just thought, this is a really beautiful space, and I'm not utilizing it, and I'm not sharing it. And I also do a lot of work with executives. I do a lot of work in the corporate community. And I really notice that when I work with executives and they understand how their mind works, they become better bosses, they become better leaders, they become better husbands or wives as well, because it kind of affects them at home. They become less stressed, and they just lead a much better life. So I kind of wanted to bring those two things together. So I saw this opportunity to say, actually, these people who I'm working with and this beautiful space that I've got, how do I bring those two things together? So we have a self-contained annex. So it's a little kind of one-bedroom apartment at the edge of the barn. So it's got its own kitchen, a lovely little lounge, which I kind of think of as the plant room, because I've got so many plants in it now. Its own bedroom, bathroom. And it's a space for people to come to take some time out to rethink, because we get caught in such a treadmill of life. So the retreat is a space for people to come, to get away from that, to press pause and to completely level up. It's about a whole new way of thinking about everything in their lives. So it's very much about shifting consciousness and how people start to look at their lives, at their careers, at their businesses, at their employees through a whole different lens.
I think that's amazing because it sounds so unique. in something I've never heard of. A month or two ago, I was watching Netflix where a lady hosts a retreat about, people who've gone through divorce or heartbreak. And that's when our mutual friend Krishna said, no, check out Michelle on LinkedIn. And she's also hosting a retreat. And that's what made us connect. And that was so unique. And I was like, wow, this could be a book idea. If ever you want to write a book about it, this is going to be amazing. What is happening for you in the next few months? What events are coming up for you?
So obviously the retreat is just launching now. So I've got some spaces and availability for the one-to-one retreat. But I'm also got a program called Cultivating Mental Strength from Within. And it's an online program, but it's a kind of a hybrid. So there'll be a mix of modules, and it really is about a whole process of self-exploration. So it's how do we start understanding what our values are, what's really important to us, why do we do the things that we do, or why do we avoid doing some of the things that we avoid. I also include the timeline therapy processes. So it's also about letting go of the past and creating a whole new way of thinking about things. And it's a 12-week program. So it's guided, and you have your modules for self-study, but we'll also meet up on Zoom every week. So there'll be a time where people can ask questions. If they're unsure of how they've interpreted themselves, or they think, well, I feel like I'm in a conflict here, it's an opportunity for discussion, live demonstration, so they can see, how things work. So the idea is that it'll be a group of people going through the same program, but on their own unique journey. So you could, applying it to self, applying it to whatever obstacles and barriers we feel we have right now, and how we go on that same journey, but in a unique way to address those individual barriers. So I have a waiting list. I'm going to launch that later in the year. If anyone is interested in that, they can come to my website, which is www.elitepartnership.co.uk. And there'll be a waiting list there, and you can find out more information as soon as it launches.
Okay, great. So that people can sign up, they can be on the waiting list, and they'll know more about it.
Yeah, and absolutely. And also by going on the waiting list, I'm much more active now in terms of sharing information, help, support. So it's also a great thing to do, just being part of that waiting list, because I'm quite a firm believer in the kind of drip approach, which is the more people start to look in this direction, the more they start to curiously explore, the more that they see about themselves, the more they get to free themselves. There's a lot of free insights, sharings, kind of things for people to explore by themselves. That's something that's worth signing up to.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for your time. And I'm so happy we had our session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.